What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today I am working on my 2009 C63 AMG and I'm having wheel bearing noise on the road. And sometimes wheel bearing noise can be very difficult to pinpoint exactly which wheel it's coming from. So today I'm going to show you guys some tips and tricks on how to diagnose wheel bearing issues. The first thing you're going to want to do is take the car for a spirited test drive and make some observations. Make sure to recreate the situations that make the noise. Observe the speed range in which the noise occurs. Now you're going to want to sway the car back and forth and see how that motion affects the noise and or the vibration that you feel. Do you feel a vibration in the steering wheel? Well, that could indicate the problem is a bearing in the front. When swaying the car back and forth, does the noise get louder when you turn to the right or to the left? In my case, the noise is getting louder when I turn left. The sound is just really too hard to capture on my microphone. But when I turn left, due to laws of physics, the right side of the car dips, putting more pressure on the right side or passenger side wheel. So I think the problem is the passenger side, but I'm not totally sure if the sound is coming from the front or the rear. So we're gonna go back to the garage now. After the test drive, what we can do is check the temperatures of all four wheels with an inexpensive infrared thermometer. These can be had for about 20 bucks, and I'll leave a link for this one below. Sometimes a bad wheel bearing will give itself away by being at a much higher temperature than the other wheels because the bad bearing will create more friction. In my case, this test was inconclusive, so now I have to move on to the next test. Now what we're going to do is we're going to raise the car. If you don't have access to a lift, a jack and stands will be enough. With the car raised, we're going to check for play in the wheel bearing by rocking the wheel back and forth in the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock positions, as well as the 12 and 6 o'clock positions. The wheel should feel tight with no clunking noise. If you have a noise, verify it's not coming from a ball joint or a tie rod or something else loose in the suspension. It might be helpful to do this from the other side of the wheel as well, underneath the car, if you do hear a noise. In my case, all four wheels are not making a clunking sound or grinding when spinning, so on to our next test. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get inside the vehicle and start the car, and then we want to turn the traction control off. Don't mind the warning lights on my dash, they're just there to remind me that I'm driving a German car. With my foot on the brake, now I'm going to put the car into gear, and now what you're going to want to do is get the drive wheels spinning at the speed that you heard the noise during your road test. Unfortunately, in this car, the speedometer was not working for the test, so we just have to estimate the speed by counting the gear shifts. So by third or fourth gear, we should be up to speed. And now we're going to lay off the throttle and immediately put the car into neutral and then turn the engine off so we don't have any external noises or additional noises. And it might be helpful to have somebody outside of the car during your test to listen and compare the sounds that the wheels are making. Now during this test, I determined that my rear wheel bearings were not the culprit, so now it's on to the front wheels. So now we're moving on to the non-driveline wheels. This particular car is rear wheel drive, so the front wheels are free spinning. So what I've done here is I've taken off the front brake calipers so that there's no drag on the rotor from the brake pads. And what I need to do is get these wheels spinning quickly enough to see if there's any audible noises, because spinning them by hand, there just really isn't any noise. So we're going to have to get these things at a high RPM, and what we're going to do is take this impact wrench, put it on the center spindle nut, and spin it up. All right, so you can hear that noise. Let's compare it to the other side. You hear that? That's definitely a bad wheel bearing. And really there was no other way for me to really verify this. No play at all. Spinning it by hand wasn't going to do it. I needed to get this thing to the right speed, and now I know that this wheel bearing is the bad one. Now that we know for a certainty which wheel bearing is bad, we continue to disassemble by removing the brake rotor, getting the caliper completely out of the way and securing it with a zip tie bungee or some type of hanger. And then we start disconnecting some of the control arms and strut bolts until we can actually tilt the knuckle forward far enough to access the bolts that hold this particular wheel bearing assembly in, and finally remove the 4 bolts holding the wheel bearing assembly on, and we remove it from the car. Now we remove the center axle nut with a vise and an impact wrench, but it's probably easier just to do this on the car. Then we remove the short shaft with an air hammer. I had the option of paying $200 for a whole new wheel bearing and hub assembly, or buying the bearing section for $50 and buying this bearing press at Harbor Freight for $150 to keep in my house garage, which is already super full. So I opted to buy the press, but now I have to figure out where I'm going to put this thing. So I'm thinking about telling my wife I bought a brand new industrial looking bookshelf for the living room. Using some random blocks of wood and angle iron and a large socket, I'm able to press this bearing out, but unfortunately one of the bearing races stayed attached to the hub. The weird thing is that there's still grease in the bearing and no signs of internal wear. So it's strange that this thing was making so much noise. So using a Dremel with a small cutting disc, I'm able to make one precise cut to help release the stuck bearing race. And then I use an air hammer to help knock it loose. With the race removed, we can start using the press to press in the new bearing. Now the bearing is good as new. Once the bearing is pressed in, we add some anti-seize to the short shaft and install a new axle nut. Always use your hand as a hammer. Now we install the new bearing, and now the brake rotor, and the caliper, and then finally the wheel. We make sure to torque everything down to spec, and once the car is lowered, we torque the axle nut down. So that's a wrap for this video. You're probably wondering why I'm sitting in the back seat of this car and not driving it. Well, I can't give you that answer, but what I can tell you is we're gonna have plenty more videos on this car trying to sort out problems, because it's a German car. There's always problems with a German car. So stay tuned for that. We're also trying to find a new rebuild project at the moment, and we'll reveal that shortly. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you next time. The window doesn't work.